It's less than the summit Barack Obama wanted originally. The U.S. president welcoming Gulf leaders first to the White House, then to his Camp David retreat outside Washington. But only 2 out of 6 monarchs from the Arabian Peninsula are actually in town. All parties insist this is in no way a snub, but it sure looks like one when you compare it to the royal treatment France's president got at last week's Gulf Cooperation Council summit in Riyadh. Particularly irksome, Sunday's late scratch of the new Saudi king. This at a time when the U.S. is backing his bombing campaign against Iran-allied Houthis from neighboring Yemen. The Saudis wary of Obama's push for a nuclear deal with an Iran whose tentacles the Saudis see not only in Yemen, but also Syria, Iraq, and in other Gulf states. Moreover, what can Obama promise the Gulf in the face of an emboldened Iran? Arab leaders want the same kind of defense alliances Washington has with Japan and South Korea. That's not going to happen. And while France last week sold Rafale fighter jets to Qatar, the Americans won't be shipping the equivalent F-35s, not so long as Israel objects. Finally, with reliance on imported oil dipping, what is that future of U.S. Gulf relations? Who needs who more? And are American interests inextricably tied to a region at the root of the surge in radical Islam? Today in the France 24 debate, Obama tries to bridge the Gulf with the Arabian Peninsula. With us to talk about it, she was formerly stationed in Kabul and Baghdad, New York Times bureau chief Elisa Rubin. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Welcome back as well to attorney and analyst Ardavan Amir Aslani.
Thank you for having me.
Nice to see you, sir.
Thank you.
From Washington, Hussein Abdul Hussein, Washington bureau chief for Kuwaiti newspaper Al Rai. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
And from London, human rights attorney Kim Sharif, who hails from Yemen. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having us.
The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and on Twitter, our hashtag F24debate. Before we talk about Camp David, let's talk about the latest news, which is coming to us from the Gulf. The tension in Yemen spilling over into the sea. Iranian gunboats firing shots this Thursday over a Singapore-flagged cargo ship in international waters. The UAE Coast Guard then came out to meet the vessel as it headed towards port in the UAE. It's just the latest incident. Iran's refusing a U.S. call to send an aid ship bound for a rebel-held port in Yemen to Djibouti first for inspection. Tehran insists it coordinated with the United Nations before the ship set sail from Iran's southern port of Bandar Abbas Monday night.
I declare, I insist, the self-restraint of the Islamic Republic of Iran is not limitless. Both Saudi Arabia and its novice rulers, as well as Americans and others, should be mindful that if they cause trouble for the Islamic Republic of Iran with regards to sending humanitarian aid to the regional countries, it will spark a fire which they would not be able to extinguish.
Is this just chest beating, or Elisa Rubin, could things spiral out of control?
Well, people have said many times the region is a tinderbox. It's almost a cliche, but it is true that there are almost an unlimited number of different places and situations in which conflict can occur. And I think that's one of the problems for the United States when it contemplates, for instance, a more robust sort of defense pact with the Gulf countries, because it could easily be drawn into defending them in the event of a conflict, for instance, with Iran, which would be a very expensive, very difficult, and almost hard to see how you could ever even resolve that. As we saw with Iraq, it didn't end even when there was a great effort to end it.
Hussein Abdul Hussein, when you hear that commander talk about Saudi Arabia and its novice rulers, is that just the usual rhetoric, or are things getting worse?
Well, I think the problem with Iran is multifaceted. First of all, you have the Iran that you see is usually not the Iran that you get. The Iran that you see with Foreign Minister Jawad Zarif is a nice, smiling Iran talking about historic opportunities of understanding between Iran and the West and Iran and its neighbors. On the other hand, you get the Iranian generals and the hot-headed Iranians who are talking about the fire, about not challenging the Islamic Republic, about the strength, about controlling 4 Arab capitals. Now, I think this is one of the main problems that many of the region countries have been facing with Iran. And at this point, I think Washington has decided to take or to consider that Iran is the nice face that they see, that the U.S. officials see and deal with. And I think this has been causing tension with the Arab partners who are saying, listen, what you see with Zarif is different than what we have to deal with in the region. And I think this is what has prompted this whole misunderstanding between the two partners, the Arab and the American, and this what has prompted the Camp David summit that we see today.
Ardavan Amir Aslani?
No, first of all, I don't think that Washington is going to get involved in the Persian Gulf. You should call it by its name.
But they've already sent the warships nearby that are on
You have
standby.
on a
There is heightened
basis-
tension.
No, there is heightened tension, but you have on a permanent basis 3 U.S. aircraft carriers stationed in the Persian Gulf, in the Arabian Sea, and in the Red Sea. That's not new. The Iranians today, and the Iranian people per se, are quite pissed off at the Saudis. I don't know whether your TV station covered the news, but I mean, you had 2 Iranian pilgrims to Saudi Arabia going to the holy cities of Mecca and Medina who'd been sexually harassed and raped by Saudi customs officials. And this has become a big story in Iran. Furthermore, the constant bombarding of the Yemeni population by the Saudis, and in particular the Shia Zaidi to Faivar people who've been massacred. You've had more than 2,000 people killed. 4/5 of those civilians has really, really created tension in Iran. And what they're doing today is basically try to react somehow to the aggressivity that they feel is being imposed upon them. Iranians are sending this ship to Yemen during this 5-day ceasefire period to provide some kind of assistance to the Yemeni population. International law provides that they have the right to do this. The United Nations has decided that some of the ships who desire so may unload their material in Djibouti. It's not a mandatory issue. Now, the Saudis want to prevent an Iranian ship carry humanitarian products to Yemen, and this bothers them. And we should understand.
It's the U.S. that says.
No, the U.S. haven't specifically ordered that. They have suggested that. But international law doesn't compel the Iranians to send it to Djibouti. But at the end of the day, what we are witnessing today in the Middle East is a sectarian issue, and people, constantly spilling oil over the fire. But at the end of the day, the Middle East is in turmoil. And what was happening in D.C. today is an attempt, on behalf of the Americans, to reassure the Persian Gulf Arabs that the Americans, contrary to what was mentioned earlier, are not going to take sides in the sectarian conflict. They're just going to try to bring some level of security to the area by the conclusion of the nuclear agreement.
Kim Sharif, the Americans not...
Yes.
Go ahead, Kim.
I find all of this really fascinating because, quite frankly, we're just skating and skirting around the main issue. The main issue here is this. This action of bombing of the Yemen is illegal under international law. It has not been sanctioned by the UN. Yemen has not done anything to Saudi Arabia for Saudi Arabia to get its allies to come and bomb it. The places of the bombing concerned is civilian areas. They are using illegal weapons. Every day, every other day, they say, we're going to stop the bombing for a respite, but they lie, they don't. The timing of the bombing is extremely shocking. It's from 2 to 3 o'clock in the morning where children and women are asleep and people haven't got a chance to escape or hide from these hideous chemical and other weapons they are using. The international community is sitting back and dithering about, there is this sectarian. There is no sectarian. Let me tell you what's going on there. The entire people of the Yemen are united in this issue. Our people are being killed every day by the thousands. Not only that, there is a huge humanitarian crisis there, and they're also being prevented from receiving humanitarian aid. Every effort being made by any country in the world to try and reach out to those poor people who are dying by the thousands on a daily basis is being prevented by the very country that is illegally, on a daily basis, at wrong hours, using wrong weapons, doing it. Now, this business of Iran and this Iran phobia is absolutely so irrational. It makes me think it's like some kind of a horror movie, this thing is. It has no basis. Iran has nothing to do with Yemen, apart from feeling for us as fellow humans, wanting to help our people. Because what the Saudis are doing is this. They're saying, if our bombs don't kill you, then we will make sure you die of hunger. The real politics
But hang on a
that's going
second.
on
The
here, sir,
Iranians,
is
the
this.
Iranians are backing the Houthi militias. That is a fact, and
They are
so.
backing the whole of the Yemen. They are doing humanitarian aid, sir. Note what they are doing. They are doing humanitarian aid, whereas the Saudis have been dropping bombs to the terrorist Al-Qaeda. Now it has become very clear that this Al-Qaeda and the ISIS and the Daesh and a lot of them are just agencies and franchises of the Saudi Wahhabi Takfiri regime. Let's face the reality. We are all under threat by these people.
I think it's,
anybody who doesn't think like them is meant to die according to their ideology. Now,
of course,
the world has to stand up and say, stop the bombing of the Yemen. For God's sake, have mercy on the women and the children and the vulnerable people who are dying by the thousands every day.
okay, let me bring in at this point Elisa Rubin on this. It's obviously Yemen is very complicated. A lot of the issues are domestic, and it's more than just a two-way fight.
But the people have agreed.
Yes.
The only issue that they were settling upon was the choice of the president.
Let me bring in Elisa Rubin.
One of
please.
the enormous difficulties in the Middle East is that there are many proxy wars going on, as well as genuine civil strife. And there are different factions in Yemen, and they have been fighting. They have been trying, the Houthis have been trying to expand their territory, including to the area of Aden, which has more Sunnis. And the response by the Saudis has been to defend Sunnis. Now, some of those Sunnis are also, as my colleague in Washington said, they are connected to Al Qaeda. They are radicals, and this has certainly helped them. So it's very complicated. And one of the main reasons for not bombing is that it's very hard to figure out where bombs go. It's a problem that every single country that does it confronts, and that is a huge issue. But I don't think that any of these countries there are clear lines.
No, the fact that the Saudis are constantly trying to portray the Yemeni issue as a sectarian issue is beyond doubt. There's not one comment that comes out of Saudi media without mentioning Iran-backed Houthis. People forget that this is a purely intra-Yemenis issue. There was a Zaidi fiver Imam country over there, independence in the 9th century till 1962. However, this paranoia that has engulfed the entire Sunni Persian Gulf Arab countries against Iran has a tendency to push them into considering that all of their woes, all of the difficulties are Iran originated.
Hussein Abdul Hussein, how did you feel when the bombing campaign began?
Well, I felt that it was the continuation of a conflict that did not start with Yemen. It has started a long time ago. It has intensified since the American war in Iraq in 2003. Since then, the balance of powers has been altered, and the Sunnis and the Shia have been both fighting to get a bigger chunk of control and power in the different capitals, the Arab capitals mainly. In Iraq, the Shia took out the Sunnis after Saddam, and the vendetta has not ended until today. And this expanded into Lebanon, it expanded into Syria. Syria already had 200,000 people killed before anything started in Yemen. And needless to say, this whole conflict between the two forces, the Shia and the Sunni, expanded all the way to Yemen. So to just take the bombing in Yemen is just taking things out of context. Why I think it's regretful to see civilians die in Yemen or elsewhere in the region. I don't think this is the whole story. I think this is only part of the story.
Or only part of the story, you're saying. And Elisa Rubin, again, this brings us back to how people view what's going on in the Arabian Peninsula with what's been going on the last 4 or 5 years throughout the wider region.
Well, and there is a recalibration going on, both in terms of how the regional fights are going on and in terms of how Washington is looking at them because of what you pointed to, which is that there is a reduction of U.S. reliance on oil. And we're seeing the U.S. policy evolve. It is also evolving in the context of the Iraq war not having gone very well. The country is still in a mess. We have troops going back in there. That's something that, from the U.S. point of view, is not cannot really be presented as a win. So I think we're looking at really a much more complex picture, and it comes in the wake of the quote, Arab Spring or Arab uprisings, which had a very disparate effects, but mostly added to enormous internal tensions in most of the countries, as well as one more failed state, which is Libya. So we're looking at a region that's only become more intensely complicated. And now to look at it from the Arab Saudi point of view, they see Iran about to have access to a lot of money if the sanctions are lifted, and about to be able to wield its power in a way it hasn't been able to. But they aren't able to offer any alternative other than to maintain sanctions forever, which is certainly not fair to the Iranian people, who are also civilians who have suffered a great deal. So we're looking at a geopolitically probably one of the most complicated jigsaw puzzles in which everyone's relative weight is kind of in constant flux.
Hussein Abdul Hussein, is there an alternative to keeping the sanctions on forever on the part of the Saudis and their allies?
Well, the thing is, I don't think that President Obama has anything concrete to sell to the GCC countries, and that's probably part of why King Salman of Saudi Arabia did not show up. Since the end of the Lausanne talks between the P5+1 and Iran, no one has seen any concrete text. Even the supreme leader of Iran has said what agreement, there's no agreement yet. And everyone thinks that the verification part has been a stumbling block. So no one really thinks that the agreement is on and that sanctions are being removed. I think what we've been hearing over the past 2 days, and this was in the New York Times this morning, was that the GCC countries said if an agreement will make Iran a threshold nuclear country that is a year away from producing a nuclear weapon, then we want to be the same. We want to have our own nuclear program. And they think it's only fair that they have capabilities as equal to those of the Iranians. I think this is what has been going on. And one more point, and you talked about that in the introduction. If the United States want to have a light footprint in the Middle East and get disengaged, I think that the Saudis and all other parties would be shopping for other allies. And this showed in the great reception of French President François Hollande in Riyadh at the time when these same kings and sheikhs and emirs refused to show up to a similar summit just a week after the summit that they have in Saudi Arabia with the French president.
Hussein, we're going to pick up on that point when we come back. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate.